Welcome to another episode of the Community Podcast, a conversational podcast exploring the stories, insights, and strategies behind learning-centric communities. Our mission is to inspire listeners by highlighting individuals who are shaping the future of how people come together to learn, grow, and thrive. I'm excited to welcome Phil Magnuszewski, a grassroots leader working to bring accessible, people-powered AI education and innovation all over New England, but specifically in my home state of New Hampshire. Phil is behind a growing movement of AI community days, inspired in part by his experience at AICO Boston. His work reflects a larger mission to raise awareness, drive involvement, and create tangible impact by connecting people who care about the ethical and practical implications of AI. With a strong belief in the power of local action, Phil is helping catalyze a regional community that's inclusive, volunteer-driven, and future-focused. Phil, it's awesome to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing?
Excellent. Thanks. Thank you so much for having me here.
It's my pleasure, and I can't wait to dive deep into your background and all the great work that you've been doing. One of the things that I've been building, Phil, over the last 4 months or so of having this podcast and inviting guests like yourself, I really want to understand AI in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's been a topic of conversation for more than 2 years at this point. Not a day goes by that we don't see AI being featured either as an economic driver, as a potential source of stress for people in the workforce. There's tremendous educational implications of AI, which, these are all topics that we can unpack. But I would love to start by learning a little bit more about your journey. What brought you into the space and, excited about AI kind of in the first place?
Yeah. So I am, I guess you would call me a tech industry veteran. I've been in the industry for about over a quarter century now, so 27 years. And I've always loved, and the reason I love the industry so much is that it's always changing. So I've always loved the opportunity to remain on the forefront of emerging technologies, right? And I've done that through my entire career. That we had, the whole Unix, or I would say the Web 2.0 um, kind of trend that happened at the end of the century there, the 99s and 2000s, and had the dot bomb kind of event happened, and that kind of transitioned into, we got into the whole concept of virtualization and cloud technologies as well. We had social media and the impact of that particular technology, and I spent a little bit of time around data governance and cybersecurity as well, which in retrospect I think kind of prepared me pretty well for the whole AI piece, right? So I got in pretty heavy to AI back in 2019 timeframe. We started doing some work for some organizations, and this is well before the whole generative AI thing kind of took off, right? And I think that's the thing that most people don't understand is, like, AI, the concept of artificial intelligence has been around since for 70 years, right? Since the mid 50s. We had the concept of it, but it wasn't until it was really democratized or really kind of made, I would say, a commercial splash with ChatGPT, which is just a few years ago now. But so yeah, I've been in the forefront of that particular technology for quite some time now, and I'm really excited and interested with where it's come so quickly. But the thing that I'm more interested and concerned about, and really trying to find where I can have influence and impact, is really on how do we make sure that, like, no one's left behind with it, right? I'm a big proponent of all the good that it can do, and I'm doing a lot of work in that space as well. But in a parallel path, I think that we risk just exacerbating that digital divide that we already see with a lot of technologies, including even the internet still, right? So what happens when we've seen what happens when students, let's say for example, don't have internet access, right? They're not able to compete. They're not learning as quickly as peers in other parts of the country, right? And artificial intelligence is one of those exponential technologies, whereas like it's changing so fast, and the applicability of it in specific use cases allow those users to I guess, and work in almost a superhuman fashion. So think about that. And then there's a whole nother group of people today that just have like, they've heard it, they've heard about it, but have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important for us to kind of underscore all the benefits that AI provides and all the risks, right? And I think depending on what you subscribe to or the kinds of media that you're exposed to or the circles that you happen to hang out in, there's a lot of uncertainty around the role that AI can play, I should say, in the future of work, in the future of learning, and in the future of community building, I would say. Have you noticed, Phil, in your experience, has the divide become more exacerbated when it comes to people's understanding of technology, people's ability to be able to leverage something that's emerging? Has AI deepened that divide, would you say, or are things coming back to a more equal footing when it comes to?
No, there's no way there's equal footing right now. It's definitely already increased. And I think on one hand, it's one set of circumstances where like people just don't know what it is. But I had this conversation with someone yesterday. We had an event last night, a community event, and we are just talking about how um, there's a lot of FUD, and for those who don't know FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt that travels around with any kind of emerging technology, and that's almost worse than having no knowledge is having incorrect knowledge about something, right? So um, I think outside of a pocket, and even in the communities and we'll get into this later, I'm sure, about the communities that we've developed so far to date, and I've been involved in addition to the New Hampshire stuff, the stuff in Boston and Cambridge, which, we'll get into that. But there's kind of a small, I would say, section of the population that attends those, and they're interested and they're trying to learn, they're trying to be part of kind of what's going on. But you get outside that circle, you're talking about maybe it's thousands of people, in the single digit thousands. There's a massive drop off in terms of engagement, in terms of understanding, in terms of fears and doubts, and understanding how it's going to impact people's lives today, as well as, 2, 3, 4 years in the future.
I'd love to unpack that a little bit more, Phil, before we get into the community stuff, which is where I think both of our passions align, even more with regards to these topics. But why do you think that FUD? What's contributing to that FUD? Because my take potentially is people are not they don't know how to apply AI in their day to day, right? To solve actual pain points that they might be running into, right? So the way that I think about it is if you don't have a use case for a technology, you probably will just be one of those uninitiated individuals consuming whatever it is that people are saying, getting the sound bites from social media or whatnot. But, in my own experience, even when I took the plunge to get the ChatGPT, $20 a month subscription,
Right.
It was because I saw, wow, this thing can really help me craft emails to prospects. This thing can really help me, I can create my own GPTs, right? And of course, there was this interest that I'm obviously, I would consider myself to be a little bit more in the initiated crowd, just based on the circles that I am in. But I really think it's being able to find use cases. I'll give you an example. One of my friends, I was in the Bay Area recently. He's a controls engineer. So he works on HVAC systems and is monitoring temperature and
Yep.
humidity levels in a building. And extremely technical guy, who knows a lot about technology, but he didn't have a use case at all for ChatGPT. So I was floored when I had to tell him when I found out that he didn't know much about it. And I kind of gave him a very quick primer, gave him a couple of scenarios in which, ChatGPT could really help him with some of the tasks that he was doing in a non-technical capacity. And, he was an immediate believer. And, when I saw him a couple of weeks ago, he was saying how much it changed some of the things that he did and how much time he's able to now kind of get back. So I feel like my assumption is the use cases aren't there. And maybe we're not doing a good enough job surfacing those pain points, but I would love to hear your take.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the use cases are there. People, I think to your point, it's more like people aren't aware of them, right?
Mm.
And I think it goes back to like just general awareness of the technology and what it can do. And when we talk about the noise that's out in the marketplace, people will see things maybe on social media, or they might be talking to somebody, and that's kind of the extent of kind of what they see. And there are a million different products out there, and things that are coming out every day, and new things being released. So there's I think a overwhelming component to just the deluge of information that's out there. We kind of call that the noise behind it, right? And so if you're not in the industry, if you don't have that fundamental understanding, which is I think one of the things we're trying to deal with, you have no concept, or there's no way to conceptualize that in a grander construct, right? To put that into perspective, right? So it just seems like, okay, there's a lot of stuff coming at me, and I don't know how to internalize it necessarily. And I think, quite frankly, that's the biggest problem, right? Because I agree with you. Like, if you can sit one-on-one with someone, I don't care who it is, right? Depending, you could be a teacher, you could be someone in the HVAC community, it can be, my mother, right? Kind of thing. If you can sit down with them and talk through, here's what it is, and here's one way you can use it in your daily life today, that's where the light bulb starts to go off in a lot of cases, right? But that is someone spending the time to sit down with somebody else to go through and to show that. But if there's a level of discomfort because I don't want to feel stupid, I don't want to feel like I don't know what's going on, to maybe engage on your own with, let's say, 80% of the population, right?
Yeah, and I'm thinking about this slightly from a marketing standpoint, and this is where I may be exhibiting my own ignorance when it comes to these things. But when you're trying to sell a product, you have to often educate the customer, right? Yeah. And I feel like in this case, maybe these large language model, these AI-driven companies, ChatGPT, OpenAI, let's say, I don't think they've had to really do that, because and that's a unique observation, right?
Great point.
I mean, yeah. Because the people that are already kind of in the know are sustaining their business model. They're still able to go out and get billions of dollars of funding and be top of mind when it comes to media, when it comes to what people are talking about. The noise is self-generating, right? They don't need to really go out and say, hey, this is the right way to do things. I'm sure they are, but in terms of dealing,
they're catching up. They're catching up on that side of things, right?
Yeah,
and I think you make an interesting point. The fact is, when like ChatGPT came out, like it's like someone just turned on a light switch, and it was just poof. It was out in the world with almost no instruction, no guardrails, no training. It's like, all right, go use it.
Yeah.
Right. So for some of us, that was exciting. Right. Okay, let's play around with it so you can do. But for a lot of folks, that's intimidating. Right. And if your only connection to artificial intelligence is watching the Terminator movies, but you're kind of saying like, no, like we can't be exploring that. We can't be using this. There's too many bad things that can occur as a result of that. So I think that was, when we consumerized AI, or when OpenAI did that, I think that was, I think maybe if they thought back, they might do it differently. But again, technology, it's always first to market. How do I get my name out there? How do I get my tech in people's hands and that kind of stuff? So,
absolutely. And I think part of the struggle now for even those, I would say like me, who are definitely initiated, definitely kind of in the know, it's trying to sift through the enormous amount of noise and try to find what is relevant, what is not relevant. I subscribe to multiple newsletters and I get them every day in my inbox like clockwork. And, some days I wake up and I'm like, I have 73 emails I have to read, of which, 10 of them are newsletters, right?
Right.
Do I want to cut out that noise? But then the hesitation is, the feeling of missing
FOMO.
out, right? FOMO, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss the one kernel, the one little headline. I'll give you an idea, or I'll give you an example, I should say. A couple of months ago, I saw that vibe coding just became like everybody's talking about it, right? Yeah. And I was in the Bay for a couple of weeks at the beginning of March as well. And I met up with somebody who I hadn't actually spoken to in person before, but we'd connected on LinkedIn. And over dinner, within the first 5 minutes, he mentions vibe coding. And I'm like, man, this is something that I just read about in a newsletter like a week before. right?
Yeah.
And had
Yeah.
I not read that newsletter, had I just archived it or whatever, right?
You're
Um,
wondering
I,
what that is.
exactly, I wouldn't have had that context, and I would have felt dumb,
Yep.
like how do I not know this if everybody's talking about it, kind of thing. So we are all kind of balancing for the folks that are outside of the know and are working to make their way into the know
Yeah.
and into how these technologies work. I think their work is cut out for them. But even for those who are inside this ecosystem, which in many ways is a little bit walled off of, it's a walled off garden, we are trying to figure out, okay, which ones are the weeds and which ones are the things that we actually
For
can
sure.
use, right?
For
Um,
sure.
yeah, yeah. Tell me more about community, Phil, because this is something that I think we really try to highlight how communities are coming together and building competencies and building awareness, nurturing
Mm.
these frameworks by which gradually, with time, we can expand people's understanding and we can, demystify some of these concepts. So I'd love for us to hear a little bit more about what you mentioned that you've had a very long and storied career in technology, but when did you think, oh, this is something I should do for the community?
Yeah, the more that I got into AI, and realized, um, that there is the potential of really, for lack of a better term, screwing over a huge portion of the population. And just, just seeing, you know, again, folks like you and myself who are like in some ways becoming superhuman with the work we're doing. And knowing that, we've got to, for the good of, I would say in some ways humanity, right? And for the future of society, we've got to make sure that we're pulling and bringing people along, um, to get engaged with it because it, again, going back to the point that it is an exponential technology, like once we get going with it, like the folks that are in the know, as it were, or that are using it on a daily basis, um, we're going to take off, and the ability to catch up is going to become harder and harder. So that's where I think I'm at a point in my career, like you start to think a little bit differently, in terms of how do I give back and how do I, have a positive impact both on my kids and, I had hopefully at some point grandkids down the line, right? And I think that because the technology is changing so fast, because it's impossible for us to keep up who watch it every single day. I think that the evolution of a community is truly going to be the only way that we can kind of bring everyone along for the ride, as well as talk through some very, very difficult discussions around, responsible AI and data privacy. And there are like at least a dozen other topics that coincide with the artificial intelligence tool sets, which is what we mostly talk about. But we've got to make sense of it, right, as a group. And the way to do that is to have these conversations in the confines or within the constructs of an ecosystem and community.
And what are some of how's the energy at these events, Phil? Because I know that you're a
Yeah.
prolific event organizer and really you're spearheading so many great initiatives
Mhm.
in New England, in Boston, and kind of leveraging the energy and the innovation ecosystem
Yeah.
that we're really blessed to have in Boston, and kind of taking some of those kernels of connection and learning and impact, taking them to places that are a little bit outside, but
Yeah.
not too far away, like New Hampshire. What are some of the what are people discussing? What are people excited about in these gatherings?
I think they're excited to talk, candidly, and we went through the whole COVID thing where people were kind of, not going out and engaging in just in any conversation, let alone something like this. And then I think, with artificial intelligence specifically, I think that there are so many questions that we all have, in terms of what it is, where are the impacts, that I think being able to talk to another human and be able to have your same concerns and thoughts kind of echoed back to you, it's almost like a therapy session
Yeah,
sometimes, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
here's what I think. What do you think? Or what are some of the concerns you're thinking that maybe should be thinking about as well? I think that connection, that conversation and having a safe space. And I'll say that about all the communities that I've kind of bumped into, either organizing or being part of. I think people are really open on that front. And they're and again, I would just go back and say that we're all trying to make sense of something that's just been thrust upon us in such a, in some ways, violent way. It's just been put out there, and we've got to now figure out, okay, what are we going to do with that?
Yeah, I feel like that feeling of validation, right?
Yeah.
Not a day goes by, Phil, in which I am not trying to connect with somebody new. I'll settle for Zoom, but I really want to do in-person connections,
Yeah.
right? Because it's where my assumptions about a lot of different topics, being an entrepreneur, being a solopreneur, being a podcast host, right? Being somebody who's trying to build a community of his own. Like these are large macro topics with tons of moving parts, right? And the value that I get from connecting with people one on one, ideally in person, it has an exponential effect on my ability to understand and pressure test my assumptions, get new ideas, right? And then
Yeah.
continue to kind of self innovate because, at least in my case, I think maybe a lot of solopreneurs can agree, we can be our own worst enemy, right? Because we're in our head so long and
Sure.
all the time,
Sure.
right? I mean, it's like,
Yep.
how
Yep.
do am I getting different perspectives? If not, I really need to find those spaces in which
Yeah.
I can get that validation. I can get that pushback. I think that's really crucial. Uh, so somebody from New Hampshire, like myself, I know that, I grew up in Nashua. Nashua
Mhm.
is a bedroom community, I think they call it, of Massachusetts, because there's so much cross pollination that's happening
Sure.
between the two
Sure.
states, and a lot of people are moving to and fro. But I would love to hear. I've spent time all over the U.S., Phil, and I'm sure many of our listeners can relate to being in communities where these spaces really didn't exist, right?
Mm.
Or they existed, but they were few and far between. I can reflect personally on one of my first, I guess, job assignments was to rural West Virginia, right? And I was flying in and out of West Virginia
Yeah.
every couple of weeks. I would say every second or third week, and spending a good amount of time on the ground with people there, doing hospital work and implementation in the healthcare field. That was my job at the time,
Mhm.
and I realized when I was in that community that there's no community is really, it's unfair to for anybody to say that a community doesn't have the potential to get to the
Yeah.
level that they want to be at, right? There's so many different reasons why maybe certain communities are being held back. It could be lack of resources, that could be funding, that could be,
Mhm.
common spaces for people to come together and talk about topics of interest. There could be a malaise that's just generally set in, which nobody can control, right? It could be
Sure.
political factors. It could be these other things that nobody can really maybe pinpoint. Sometimes it's more than one cause. But one of the things that I really feel like I want to be a part of, and people like you are really spearheading, is democratizing this knowledge of AI, really enabling anybody out there who has the desire to be a part of this in a very proactive and holistic way to actually contribute, right? So I would love to hear maybe why New Hampshire, number one, and how is the New Hampshire community really, how is it providing you value, and where do you get the inspiration to continue to do the work that you're doing there?
Well, why New Hampshire is, I guess, probably the easiest part. I've lived in New Hampshire for since 1996. So I am, I wasn't born here, but moved here back then, and raised my family in New Hampshire. And it's ironic. I tell the story that I've been in the tech industry for as long as I've been, and I've been doing most of my work outside, like in Massachusetts and Connecticut and New York, and those kind of things as well. And part of me is just like, New Hampshire is such an amazing place to live, right? Quality of life is just absolutely off the charts. We have an incredible education system, universities, K-12. We have an incredible populace that's intelligent, that's thoughtful. So, part of me is just like, I would love, and first of all, like I hadn't even intended to be kind of the instigator in all of this, right? I would wanted to kind of get engaged in some of this. And I looked around and there really wasn't, what I thought was, the right kind of format and the right level of discussions happening around it. And I'm the first to say is like, I'm not a fan. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Right. And I've seen and been part of what's been happening in Massachusetts, who's done a tremendous job in some areas of building that ecosystem and community. I'm saying, what if we can take that model, take some of the learnings from down there and bring that up into New Hampshire? The challenge I would say with New Hampshire is it's from a geographical perspective, it's a little more fragmented and spread out. So, what gets me kind of energized around it is the opportunity to kind of work with volunteers in different parts of the state to kind of bring this idea to life, right? And to kind of get the community engagement started, right? To kind of get it going. But my anticipation and goal and hope is that these communities kind of take on a life of their own, where people are having conversations in coffee shops, or they're meeting up in, at a bar and talking about some of these things as well. I get my energy from being able to know that I'm impacting that connection and these conversations around a topic that's just so incredibly important to everyone at this point.
Yeah, and are you seeing certain demographics or certain folks in certain professions maybe gravitating to these events in New Hampshire just because it's a smaller ecosystem? I'm curious to hear
Yeah.
whether it's more tech folks, is it education folks, is it business
It starts
folks?
with, yeah, it starts
Yeah.
with the tech folks. It's
Hmm.
starting with the tech folks, but we had I think we had a half a dozen um, educators in the room last night as well. So education, I mean, the impact there we know is going to be immense. So they're trying to get their arms around it to understand what's possible. I do, and I think, and candidly, I think that's where I expected it to start, because those are the people that are kind of the first movers on that stuff, anyways.
Yeah.
Um, but beyond that, I think the goal is to try to expand that to other people in other professions. And one of the takeaways that I keep asking people for is like, when you leave today, like I'm giving you, there's a homework assignment. Like you need to go talk to two people about some of the things that you learned here today, right? And to get them engaged. So it's that whole of, if you multiply, you double kind of the conversations every time you leave kind of thing. It just, helps get the word out. It gets people engaged at that point. But it's, we started back in January, and we're on our fourth event coming up now, and we'll get there.
So how do you delegate responsibilities as all these folks are getting together? It's a geographically kind of, you have folks
Yeah.
that are Manchester, Nashua, Concord, and then you have the Seacoast, and you have places that are
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
around. How are you managing all these different pieces of the puzzle?
Well, a couple things. I do want to, I won't call anyone out specifically, but our sponsors are a big piece of that, right? Having
Mm,
businesses within each of those communities that are willing to help and engage is a big piece of it. But
yeah.
the other thing I'll say too is that, like, there has been no shortage of people wanting to help and volunteer in this, right? So I've had, even after the first event, like, people like, hey, how can I get involved? How can I help out? And having those kind of conversations. So, the model is to have, I'll say, in region, so we call them regional organizers, regional leads, who will be leading those specific communities in those specific like they live there, they work there, and that kind of stuff, so that they can have those ad hoc conversations. They can help organize the larger events, and they can help kind of spearhead the diffusion of our learnings and engagement with the community as well. Like, you can't do it all yourself. That's the one thing, like, as a community organizer, like, my job isn't to be the person. It's to help, set the vision and to help get things started. But ideally, that in a community, there are plenty of people who can help build and grow it.
It's incredibly inspirational, Phil, and that's one of the things that I really try to encourage other community builders to kind of think along those lines where, yes, you're the catalyst, maybe you're the founder and the glue that kind of still holds that initial cohort together, but real community building is when each of those initial members or the people that join
Yeah.
in turn build the communities on their own, right? And
Yep.
there's kind of like, it's like the hub and spoke model, right? Like there's
Yes.
different areas that are now becoming these ecosystems in their own right, and taking those best practices, feeding them back to maybe the central
Mhm.
leadership team, the key organizers, and really kind of collaboratively building that out in a very unified way, right?
Yeah.
Uh, if you are able to share, I'd love to understand like any other challenges or opportunities that you're noticing operating between Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Like my understanding is Massachusetts, there's a lot of state resources that are available as well. There's a big entrepreneurial community. I'm sure the sponsors here in Massachusetts have also been a huge part of the success that you've enjoyed. Is it similar in New Hampshire? Or are there maybe certain things that you'd wish?
No, there are some very unique challenges in New Hampshire, and which is why, the state doesn't have funding to just throw at these things, right? So I think a
Mm,
lot of what we're doing in New Hampshire is just grassroots kind of, organizing without the, I would say, financial support
yeah.
of the state. It's not that they're not interested in helping, and they obviously understand the value of AI, but I think like that's one of the bigger challenges is that um it's the community itself that's building on its own, right? Without I would say the backing
Mm.
of the state at the state level.
Yeah, I think maybe this can eventually dovetail into some activism or encouragement for the state to think about these things, right?
It could
It's
be.
yeah,
It could
yeah.
be. And we keep an eye on some of the federal stuff going on too. I mean, there was an executive order a few weeks back that talked about providing some funding for education in K-12 as well as apprenticeships and stuff like that as well. So we will
Hmm.
continue to monitor that and see if there are ways that we can leverage some of the workforce development dollars that are out there too.
I'd love to project a little bit into the future, given that this initiative, at least in New Hampshire, is kind of the latest version of the work that you've been doing now for many years.
Hmm.
How do you foresee the next, this was launched in January, so it's been about 4 months, right?
Yeah.
What do you see happening in the next 6 months, in the next year that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I think getting a baseline from uh, where each of the communities are is kind of the first piece of it. Our goal is to, over the course of time, and I think you hit on it a little bit earlier, is being able to, by having different leaders in different communities. None of us is as smart of all as all of us, kind of thing, right? You're getting different perspectives and different approaches that we can start to build best practices around in terms of community engagement. I think the real
Hmm.
exciting thing too that is, as we understand those things, is starting to build I would say, a foundational book of assets, if you will, that can be used across, whether it's education, whether it's manufacturing, but just getting cross section and understanding in terms of, okay, if you're just getting into it, here are some of the resources you can go to that have been curated, validated, and that you can kind of trust, kind of gives you an idea of what's going on, right? So I think doing that, I think engagement with some of the larger tech companies is on the roadmap for us. All the big, AWS, Google, Microsoft, those kind of things. They all have, tech for good programs. They all have stuff that nonprofits can leverage to kind of um, get people's hands on the technology, to get them trained to do those things as well. So I foresee us taking on a bigger role with taking us from whatever level we are today and whatever level an individual is today, and starting to just up the game for everybody over the course of the next 6 to 9 months.
I think it's incredibly exciting, Phil. And I think if you are able to, I mean, clearly you're generating amazing impact, and it's slowly but surely going to grow as you continue to build this out even more. I think this can become a very valuable playbook and set of best practices for other states. I mean, I'm thinking about Vermont, I'm thinking about Maine. I'm not sure if
Hmm.
those are, neighbors in New England may have, similar initiatives. But even back to what I was talking about with West Virginia, um,
Yeah.
if you're able to come up with with a really solid playbook, right?
Mhm.
um, and kind of organically generate this community-led growth, right? It can serve as a model for many other places in the world, I would say. Um, Two more questions about community building for
Yeah.
you, Phil. What would accelerate your movement right now? Like, what would be the rocket fuel that would just be like, and maybe it's not, maybe you don't need something like that right now, but I'm curious always to see if there's like one
Yeah.
need that you could address. What would that be?
I think funding wouldn't hurt. And I say that because, we're all doing this, I would say, as volunteer efforts. And we all
Yeah.
have day jobs and other things, got lives going on outside of this. So I think the ability to get some funding to have maybe some dedicated resourcing
Hmm.
around it would be a big piece of it. That would help accelerate. I think, honestly, I think that's probably the biggest thing because we have plenty of folks who are interested in helping, right? And I think that over the past 3 months in particular, we've identified what the model looks like, the hub and spoke that you spoke about. I think we have that down, and we have an understanding of having at least a good handful of these events kind of under our belt in terms of what
Yeah.
we need to do, what they look like, how do we engage. All those pieces are kind of in place at this point. So um, I think with that foundational structure in place, I think that, yeah, if we can get some funding, we could really do some things that would be just supercharge this.
And then the second question, and I might have lied, there might be one more, but
That
the second question around this idea of building community, specifically within the scope of getting involved. If somebody wants to do this, let's say somebody's listening to this podcast in another country, in a part of the world where they have this interest, but there's no framework in place, there's no community in place. What is one piece of advice you would give that trailblazer, that pioneer, kind of like you were in New Hampshire? What's one thing that they can do to really nurture this into something bigger?
I say it helps to have a network of people, which I've had the benefit of doing. But I would honestly say, and it's going to sound really hokey, but just do it. Like just
Sure.
do one event. Just do a one event. And I think because of the nature of interest around the technology and a desire, just a desire, sheer desire of people to talk about it, I think you'd be surprised with how quickly you can get people engaged. And it starts with
Mm.
just one event, one get together, one meetup kind of thing, and that will kind of spark things for you.
Yeah, and you really let the enthusiasm and the energy and the excitement
Uh,
that is kind of organically fostered in that first meetup or in those initial conversations to maybe chart the course for future events. And, people will self-volunteer probably,
yep.
right? At that point, and they'll get involved, and then you can slowly start to build that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Um, we're going to put links to all of your amazing work in the show notes, Phil. I know
Awesome.
AI in New Hampshire, the actively growing LinkedIn group there. But if folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn
LinkedIn?
is it. I
Yeah.
spend most of my life in LinkedIn from a social media perspective for sure, and it's the
Yeah.
easiest way to both get in touch with me, but also to kind of see what's going on as well.
That makes two of us. Yeah. If I were to say the noise around social media, I try to limit that to just one channel where I
Yeah,
spend most of my time and get the most value. So,
I would
Phil, it was
if
awesome. Yeah. Go ahead,
yeah
please. Yeah. Yeah.
no, I would just say just a couple things to kind of wrap up that I
Please.
would just
Absolutely.
want to kind of share with the folks who are listening here is
Yeah.
I the more that we've gotten into the local community piece of it, the more that uh, I'm I'm convinced that it's the right approach, right? It's being in a room with your neighbor, talking about what's going on. The idea is that those conversations then spill over and carry over into you're over at your neighbors for happy hour or at a pool party or at your kid's soccer game. And I hope people aren't talking about AI all the time. So I don't want that to be the message here. But I think by engaging at such a local level with something that's so important is probably going to be the most impactful and efficient way to kind of get people engaged and understanding what's going on with it so that we can, collectively understand what guardrails need to be in place. How is that going to impact my kids' education? How is it going to, if I'm looking to start a business, how is it going to change what that looks like over the course of like I truly believe that hyper local conversation and focus, I can't overemphasize how valuable I think that piece of it is. And then the other piece I would leave you with too is that what I've seen even in the the Boston and Cambridge and Massachusetts AI ecosystem as well is I think that we've over the past couple years have had some really good conversations around generally AI and maybe some of the tools and things like that. I think people are hungry for something more. We just did the AIC the AICO conference a couple weeks ago in Cambridge. That was one we had a roundtable discussion. That was one of the things like, all right, where does the rubber meet the road now? Right? Talk to me about specific use cases. Talk to me about how people are using it. Where have things failed? What does the return on investment look like on some of the projects that have been implemented? How do I go from a proof of concept into something that's production ready? Right? That's what people are looking for now. And I think we as community organizers need to recognize that and start to become more focused with the conversations too.
Both are incredible takeaways, Phil. I think kind of it's very interesting how we began the conversation kind of talking a little bit about use cases and how maybe folks are struggling to understand what's in it for me, you know?
Yeah.
I understand AI is out there and everybody's talking about it. It's in the air we breathe, but how do I actually make use of it?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's really encouraging to hear that maybe after this honeymoon phase of like AI, and I'm not saying it's going to be over anytime soon, but business leaders and entrepreneurs and community leaders are now thinking about, okay, where does the rubber meet the road? To use your words,
Yeah.
how do we actually leverage this technology for outcomes, right?
Yeah.
For on the ground realities or pain points or things that we're dealing with day to
Yeah.
day. How can this actually move the needle? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Yeah. Phil, it was an absolute pleasure hosting you, and I can't wait to see more of your events come to fruition. Can't wait to attend them as well, hopefully up in New Hampshire as soon as I get a chance. And thank you so much for being a part of this experience.
You bet. Thanks, Farhan.